Hello, fellow pre-servitors. Today, I'll just be doing a talk about the future of this channel and whether or not I'll be doing more Havoc content. The short answer is pretty much no. I'm actually kind of looking forward to Killing Floor 3 despite the opinions online being kind of pretty polarizing. So I thought I'll give it a chance to maybe just do some commentary on the state of Havoc in Darktide, and later on the video, the main meat will be me sharing about the builds and how and why I think they work the way they do, and what I would personally recommend for anyone looking to climb up the ladder. But for the most part, this is kind of going to be unscripted and well, not exactly, because I had like a 2K word essay on this and I'm kind of going off script here. But yeah, so that'll be the gist of it. So, right, getting straight into it, let's have the commentary. Right, so one of the things I've felt about Havoc and playing it in Darktide is that many of the players who get into it, that want to actually do Havoc and that want to actually climb up the ranks, I've kind of get a sense that some of these players have no idea what they're doing, and part of it, can be attributed to their personal, effort and their personal level of skill or the level of, the kind of information they seek to gather to help them play the game better. And another aspect is also on the developers, in the sense that Havoc has a lot of mechanics that are sort of poorly explained. But in any case, regardless, this is targeted for the people who are looking to climb up the ladder in Havoc, which means to say that you're starting out from, like, whether is it level 1, level 16 after doing your Auric Maelstrom, and you're looking to climb to Havoc in 30 and 40 for the maximum resources available to accumulate the fancy amounts of plasteel and diamantine. And one of the things that struck me as very odd is that maybe it's just me and maybe it's just my perception, but there seems to be this pushback against playing meta builds. So, and by meta, we mean the most efficient tactics available. That's what it means explicitly. And the thing that all gets me every time is that, like, Havoc is about pushing yourself to the limits and, really subjecting yourself to lots of cock and ball torture to put yourself through the most difficult content in the most harshest ways. And I've always felt a sense of accomplishment personally from being able to clear it with a team. That this is the sort of experiences in a cooperative hot shooter game that I've always wanted to vie towards. And seeing people try and fail with the limited time they have just struck me as something that's very odd, because with the teammates that I've been playing with over the past 6 to 7 months, ever since I've joined the Darktide Southeast Asian Discord, I've had a win rate of pretty much about on the order of 70 to 80% win rate. This is not going to be fully accurate because some of the old history was being deleted. But essentially, well, yeah, the idea is that I don't actually spend a lot of time failing. I spend more time winning games than I do losing them. But this is not a statement of to boost my own ego. This is more like a statement of fact. And having played with both seasoned and less experienced players alike, the one common problem I find, or rather, three common problems I find, largely boils down to three factors. The first one, and the most obvious one, is the builds. The second one will be the level of ability and the teamwork, and the last one will be execution involved. So, for the most part, I think the things that can be corrected with more gameplay experience and research over time will be things like your execution, meaning to say that how you respond accordingly to things like bosses and situations. That there are plenty of other better videos on that do a good job explaining. One of the videos I recommend for anyone looking to get into Havoc would be JSet's video, on which is basically his last and only video on Havoc 2.0, which is the iteration that Fatshark has had since the end of March 2025. He does a very good and comprehensive look through into each of the new modifiers that introduced. Just note that Fatshark has since rotated in the Havoc 1.0 modifiers, which is Cranial Corruption, Pass Harden, Obion 21st, and Blight Spreads. They do have it occasionally in and out onto the rotation pool. But those are relatively more simplistic compared to what's covered in the new Havoc 2.0 modifiers. So if you don't know what those are and you're willing to check that out, this is the best video for it. Right. So, but aside from that, it's execution aside, we talk about teamwork play, and that's something that's basically supposed to be natural in any cooperative game. Saving your teammates from mutants, Poxhounds, trappers, making sure to cover for them when they're in trouble. All this thing just boils down to paying attention to your teammates and using the information on your HUD or your UI, your user interface, to help you make decisions in game. And the one thing that gets me always is the people who go into Havocs 30 and above, bringing absolutely, for lack of a better word, I'm not gonna miss my words here, is dog shit builds. And I've seen players like that. I don't want to name any negatives because I don't want to call anyone in particular. But you have people that are like pulling the contribution of what 30% to 40% of the team average, and thinking that that they have contributed to a win. And sometimes this strikes me as very odd. Like, I've seen people at Havoc 40 play like this, and they keep on playing like this. And honestly, as someone who's very, very in tune with how I feel and in terms of how much weight or how much stress I'm under to actually get the team together and to make sure that the whole team is still running in cohesively to actually win the game and stay alive. It's very telling when you're playing with a player that is weak or is not doing his job in particular. So, and what do we mean by not doing jobs? This gets a bit nuanced. It's a very nuanced discussion, but essentially the idea is that the player is just getting carried. And when you're playing a Havoc, anything above 30 to 40, where basically the difficulty modifiers are its harshest, ammo is at its lowest, you have the most number of specials on you, you can have bullshit like 4 bosses coming at you at the same time, you have to deal with your rituals, your purple healing, your red crowd control, and your orange basically the amount of tankiness, and all the mobs are swarmed on you. Each and every member is expected to do his part to have a smooth game. And make no mistake, in Darktide, the average match length is on the order of what? 25 to 35 minutes. On Havoc 40, it can sometimes extend to 45 or even 50 minutes in the worst case scenarios. So it's very painful when you get into scenarios where you go through with a team for like 40 minutes of a game, and then in that 40 minutes you're struggling to keep the team alive. Like, you're using your shouts off cooldown, using abilities to make sure that your teammate is topped up with golden toughness, they have their survivability on. And one single mistake by a weak player that puts him out of position, gets him caught out of coherency, he goes down, and you lose, like, for example, the Ogryn, the Taunt Ogryn is lost, and the twins come on you, and you basically wipe because of that, and you've wasted 40 minutes of your time, or worse still, you've basically gotten a demotion because of that. It can be a very frustrating experience, especially more so for the people whose time is limited. So which brings me back full circle to the original point. I don't understand for the life of me why somehow seems to be this narrative that playing non-meta or playing with inefficient builds is somehow favorable for a team in Havoc. I don't get this mentality one bit at all. So, well, yeah, rant over, but essentially what I want to strive across, or what I want to push across, is the main narrative is that if you're going to be playing in Havoc and expecting to win with whether is it strangers or like friends with like-minded attitudes, means to say that you're not going in to screw around and have fun, you're actually going in to try and climb up the ranks. Please, for the love of God, bring a build that you can perform at. And how do you judge whether or not you're performing? That's simply put, let's look at the statistics. And one of the statistics that can be gleaned from, unfortunately, requires a modifier because, scoreboards in the game somehow are not a thing thanks to Fat Shark. I don't know what decision they're making. But you want to, be making sure that you're pulling your weight. Things like you're not hogging ammo unnecessarily, you're not getting caught excessively by hounds, trappers, and whatnot. You're doing your fair share in terms of killing things like your lesser enemies, like your common poxwalkers, Mobians. You're killing your fair share of specials and elites. And if you're like on a veteran, you're on specialist duty, you're doing your fair share to make sure that things are being removed from the game. Or like, they're deleted from existence so that they don't pose a threat to you and the rest of your team. And I understand that this is actually a very fully nuanced conversation. I had like a 500-word write-up on like how to interpret this scoreboard, but the gist of it is that there are quantitative metrics, and the quantitative metrics alone are enough to paint a picture of whether or not you are contributing to your team. Now, by and large, let's use the classic one of every role minus the Arbites to benchmark for like what a general Havoc game should look like. Of course, this will change corresponding to the types of enemy types you're getting, whether you're getting more carapace armor hordes, whether you're getting more drags or specials instead of the armor hordes, whether you're getting a shotgun seed, a gunner seed, so on and so forth. All these things will change accordingly, and of course the map as well, and the modifiers. Like for example, purple tends to inflate Psyker damage more, but generally speaking, you're going to be hovering around like 50 to you want to be each of your teams should not be doing less than half, or the so-called the most offensively weakest player should not be doing less than half of the damage of the strongest team player. And usually this 50% role will go to the Chorus Zealot, because the Chorus Zealot in a safe team composition, he's running Golden Chorus duty. He's spending pretty much like at least 1/3 or 1/4 of the game just basically standing there, holding his book out and doing nothing except providing survivability and staggering things for the rest of the team to survive. And then you have your Taunt Ogryn, who's also playing a quite supportive role. And that leaves your Psyker to your crowd control duty and your veteran on like specials elimination and whatnot. So I understand that this is fairly narrow in terms of my field of my personal view on like what a Havoc team composition is structured like. But essentially, in one sentence, you don't want to be doing 40 to 30% of your team average, not just in terms of actual damage, but also in terms of specialists and your kills. And if you're, let's say, for example, you can be low on your disablers and specialists, but you're making up for it in terms of, let's say, lesser enemies, or your things like your supportive roles, like reviving teammates, making sure they're top up with toughness. And at the same time, you're not consuming a lot of resources, you're not taking a lot of Medicaid stations, you're not taking out most of the ammo. So for most of my scoreboards when I'm playing as a veteran, I am a very shooty kind of person. I like shooting things. I'm not a huge fan of melee, and I'm almost always playing either the plasma gun or the bolt gun on the veteran. So I will be pretty much vacuuming up all the ammo, given the minus 60% ammo limitations on Havoc 33 and higher. And that's why my stats usually look like this. But I make sure to compensate for my high resource consumption rate by, doing damage, actually killing things. And of course, I also bring your team support skills, which I will talk more about later when I get to the individual specific builds. But yeah, so generally speaking, you want your scoreboards to be looking something like this. And how you should be benchmarking it is, aside from benchmarking your performance against team average, you want to be looking at how you're doing game on game with the same build, maybe with a different team, and you don't want to be dipping above. But let's say if you're playing the Chorus Zealot, where you have the lowest offensive power, and your Psyker or your veteran is doing less damage than you, usually that's a pretty big red flag. Like, this is either a player that is using a pretty bad build, or he has some other fundamental problems and skills in the game that has to correct. And it will show qualitatively in your game when you play with the same player over and over again. You're going to be losing games consistently, a lot more consistently, and yeah, you will get situations like this where it becomes very telling when your teammates are weaker than they're supposed to be or what's required to win a Havoc, right? So all this rambling aside, just do note that scoreboard alone is just a quantitative measure, and please don't use it as a means to like harass or degrade other people, but use it to make a scientific and a statistical evaluation of how you're faring or how your teammates are faring for you to make further decisions on how you're going to approach playing the game. Alright? So now let's get into the main meat. For those who don't already know me, I'm kind of a masochistic guy. I prefer going into the highest difficulty, and I get a sense of accomplishment of winning. I'm not the kind of person who basically deviates and plays a variation on different builds in the game. I don't usually venture out beyond something that I find works most efficiently, and that's why you see most of my Havoc gameplay videos are me just doing, plasma gun, bow gun veteran. Is it boring? Sure, yeah, maybe. But is it something that I enjoy? Well, I really don't care as long as I win, honestly, because to me the results speak for itself, and that's all that matters. Like, and anyone getting to Havoc with limited time should know this, because each match is going to be, as we mentioned earlier, 30 to 45 minutes, and you don't want to be wasting that entire time just losing and getting demoted and not getting what you want at the end of the day. Having said that, however, I will actually be probably moving on from Havoc. I won't be putting out content on this too regularly. Thanks, Rennick. Yeah, so but I'm looking forward to Killing Floor 3 that's going to release next week. Hopefully that provides a new trend of at least more inspiration for me to continue pushing out content on this channel. But I thought I'll end off on Darktide Havoc by at least pushing out some informative builds on like why I take certain builds and the way I choose to play them. Alright, so to get into it proper, let's start talking about the veteran. So the veteran's bread and butter, essentially, he has one exclusive weapon that comes out head and shoulders on top of any other weapon, at least in my opinion, and that's going to be the plasma gun. So dump stats wise, some people dump charge rate. I personally prefer my bullets coming out as fast as they can, which is why I go for 80% on it. I dumped thermal resistance. There is the option of balancing between your charge rate, maybe ammo and thermal resistance. And thermal resistance, the cutoff will be 68 or 69%, where you can shoot 8 times continuously without going above the 100% threshold mark. Alright, so for me, I personally run the Flag Armored and Maniacs for maximum damage on your gunners and your specials, like things like your trappers and your flamers. Bombers are unarmored enemies, but usually a well-placed headshot with focus target is usually able to one-tap them, even on Havoc 40, unless they are running the orange modifier as well. Right, and then for the blessings, it's pretty much gets hot and rising heat. Some people choose to run blaze away instead. I'm not fond of that because that usually entails having to shoot continuously, and you want to one shot, or you shouldn't be having to shoot the second time if you can't already one shot them. So I'm not a fan of that. I usually also do shoot into like rangers and maulers. Maulers will take body shots. For crushers, I like to put one shot at least into the head to make sure they stumble and fall on the ground. But that's just my personal playstyle. You can of course opt to just melee them instead with the good old trusty dueling sword. And until they nerf these two weapons, which is the leaks from the Chinese release, they're saying that they're gonna nerf this weapon soon. Until they nerf them, I still think that by and far these are the two weapons, the go-tos for playing a Havoc game. As for your Kyros, you want to generally run either 2 toughness, 3 stamina. Stamina is always nice to have because it enables you to block and run a bit more often. As for your talents, right, so here's where we go into the breakdown of each individual class. Now, at the beginning, I actually chose the middle path, Close Order Drill and the Confirm Kill to provide the additional toughness damage reduction. But I think there was a patch around the time of Havoc 2.0 in late March where they actually improved things like long shot. And having played a more offensive build and realizing that, Close Order Drill is kind of pointless, especially when your team isn't playing coherency that much, having long shot instead does give you more flexibility in terms of meeting your one-shot breakpoints. So that's the reason why I actually moved down the left path instead for the plasma gun build. Now, you can, if you're just starting out and you're not so confident about your survivability, take the middle path. Close Order Drill and Confirm Kill are the ones I would recommend. If I'm playing the bolt gun instead of the plasma, I'll go for the weapon swap speed and the tactical reload. Go down the right path, but you don't want to be spending more than 3 points in the tree, whichever path you're taking, because there are way more valuable nodes to be taken below. Alright, so moving on, for the grenades wise, right? If you notice that because I'm using the shredder, I'm using the dueling sword and the plasma, I have pretty much no crowd control whatsoever. I'm relying on pretty much either my teammates or the shredders, or I'm going to drop a grenade and run, block and shove poxwalkers and special, and just run away from them, or I'll just melee them in the head one by one, which is a very slow and agonizing process. Alright, so shredder frag grenades is the ones that gives you a lot of your area of effect damage. Alright, and this is the one that we'll go to generally. Some people choose to run cracks, we'll talk about that later, or smoke grenades, but I personally prefer the shredders. Moving down the list, there's only one irrelevant aura. I have seen veterans not taking survivalists to Havoc, and really makes me question their sanity because I don't know why anyone would do this if you're bringing a veteran in the first place. Right, survivalist is just that good. It just keeps up your ammo sustainability and ensures that your team, pretty much is able to continue using the guns rather than meleeing throughout the entire match. Now, Killzone in particular is one of the ones, if I'm not mistaken, that it probably got buffed in April. I might be wrong on this, but after having used it in Havoc, because as a veteran you're playing a range role, you're playing a shooty style, you shouldn't be in range of getting hit by melee stuff. Melee stuff is you either lure them back into your Psyker for him to flame them all down, or let your Ogryn deal with them. And as a result, you will rarely ever be taking melee damage except for maybe bosses and rages. And even then, it's somewhat a bit finicky, it's a bit buggy. It seems to have pretty much 100% uptime. with golden toughness as well, so I'm not too sure about that, but purely based going off the UI, it seems to be active all the time, so this is definitely nice to have to boost your damage breakpoints. As for the middle tree, right, once again, there's only one relevant active ability that's great for Havoc in terms of supporting not just you but the rest of your team, and that's the Voice of Command. And for this reason, we're going to venture down to the middle part. And Field Improvisation and Demolition Stockpile are two nodes that you want to have to basically keep up your teammates' supplies and your own grenade survivability as well. Duty and Honor, the Golden Toughness modifier for Shout. No questions required as to why this is good, because Golden Toughness in this game is just that bastard. Right, so, and moving down the list, for the rest of the nodes, I am personally a focus target player. Why focus target? And the rest of the builds are kind of standard. I won't be talking too much about them, but weak spot damage, base damage on elites, ability cooldown marksman. This is the flex point that I have. You can take this and put it anywhere else you like. I like to have this as well because of how often your shout is going to be off cooldown. And then for the Emperor, things like, giving yourself more range-based damage. 5 seconds may seem like a short time, but considering you'll be shouting on average of every 15 seconds, this is going to have a pretty high uptime. And for the rest, Iron Will, definitely one that's needed, is the Veteran's Bread and Butter. Now, as for Focus Target, basically how it works is that these 3 points, the keystone itself and the 2 modifiers, all work in tandem. Redirect Fire, how it works is that if you tag a target with, let's say, 3 stacks of focus target, you kill it, you have 3 stacks. In the next second, you tag another target, which will usually be like, 2 or 3 stacks then. You kill it again. It won't reset to 3 stacks. It actually becomes an additive, cumulative number of stacks. So that means to say that if you are in the habit of continuously tagging enemies like I am, you're going to be having 8 times 1.5% damage uptime almost perpetually throughout the entire match if you're not saving up on your stacks, and that is basically going to be a flat 12% damage increase on your entire team and not just you, assuming you're staying in coherency, of course, for pretty much almost the entire game. So the veteran that I play, despite my scoreboard showing that I have like the most damage, is actually a very supportive one, and I've been told, this is other people's opinions, not mine, that when I play veteran with them, it tends to be a smoother experience as opposed to someone else playing a veteran with, let's say, a non-focus target build or a marksman focus, which I think is a very weak keystone, or let's say things like a weapon specialist. I understand that weapon specialist does enable your builds using things like your recon last gun, especially with the onslaught build, and it also allows for like your shotguns, no reload, downtime, so on and so forth. There are different builds for that. I respect those builds, but it's personally not my style. I do favor builds that provide for a more supportive playstyle and help to keep the team alive as much as possible. So on execution, basically veteran, it's very straightforward. You find the target, you ping it, you shoot it, you press F as much as possible, making sure to cover most of your teammates in coherency as much as you can. And bearing in mind that you're playing around your cooldown reduction meta, which is your benefits, things from like tactical awareness, as well as your Psyker's Psykinetic Aura and Seer's Presence, your Ogryn's Bruiser node that also affects you as well, you're assuming they kill special enemies. Your Shout cooldown is going to be on a very, very, very high uptime. That means to say that you can perpetually have 100% golden toughness, if the stars align and the stars line up, but generally it's on the order of like 70 to 80% uptime of golden toughness just from Voice of Command alone. So this allows you to play games as a veteran where you're the only source of golden toughness in your team, but your team is just purely able to survive with you providing golden toughness without a chorus zealot. Right, so that is the gist and the build that I usually do play. Right, so sometimes I do deviate. Instead of the plasma gun, I do deviate to the bolt gun build. This is when I'm bored of the plasma and I want to get a bit more damage on like bosses. Alright, so and I will do things like drop 3 points to go down the left path instead. Right, I'll still default the bolt gun, and pretty much it's going to be almost the same build except for the top part just being different, and that's about it. Right, so yeah, so that will be the gist of the veteran builds that I use. Okay. Now as for the melee, the dueling sword, you'll find it a bit odd here because most people drop mobility instead. I'm the kind of person that I like to have my movement speed as fast as possible. I'm not a fan of like managing hordes and like trying to cleave them in a way. And in any case, the cleave damage from the dueling sword is pretty piss poor to begin with. Like, the difference between 60 to 80% is not going to be a lot because your cleave damage is going to be really, really low to begin with. And it really doesn't do much in the grand scheme of things in terms of like how much you're going to be able to clear hots as a dueling sword. If you actually want a hot clear weapon, you run things like the power sword instead. I personally hate the weapon because I find it too slow and clunky. I am not a fan of it, and I think the dueling sword does its purpose, and it allows me to take out things like your poxhounds and mutants with a focus target stack applied in one shot. So, and that's the reason why I continue to run it. Now, until they rework the dueling sword and the plasma gun, I think for the most part this is the personal veteran build I'll be using. And yeah, that's the gist of it. And once again, don't forget, you can use whatever build you like, but bearing in mind that if you don't perform with your build based on scoreboard, quantitative metrics, and qualitative metrics like how stressed they are, trying to keep your team alive and how much weight they're pulling just to make sure that, the team is staying in coherency, then, that it doesn't really matter what you think about your build or whether or not you're having fun if one of your main agendas is to win the game. Because if you're not going to win the game with a shitty build or a shitty playstyle, you are just torturing yourself. You're just being insane. You're going to the same thing, expecting a different result, trying the same thing over and again. And the easiest thing of all to change is your build. Like, it's not expensive. Ever since the lock and loaded update, it's not being expensive to buy a new weapon, farm for the right stats, and upgrade it to full. It doesn't cost a lot of resources, assuming you've been playing for a sufficiently long amount of time. Alright. Right, so moving on to the different class now, let's talk about the Zealot in order. So the Zealot, in a safe scenario, he's usually running the Chorus build. I have played games with the Chorus Zealot being swapped out for Arbites, or sometimes in rarer cases a Charged Zealot. For the most part, the Chorus Zealot is preferred because in a more conservative, safe playstyle, when you're looking to win games consistently and not make risky plays, it allows for that oh shit moment where like you can recover from a potentially bad position, change positions from one end of the map to another while keeping the rest of the team virtually invincible, holding out for a revive, so on and so forth. There's many things that a Chorus Zealot can do that not many other talents in the game can provide for in terms of defensive capabilities. In terms of weapon, we are basically stuck on the best fucking weapon in the game, the dueling sword. Once more, same stats. I dump cleave damage because I don't believe in using it as a cleave weapon. I run Maniacs and Carapace instead of Flak on my Zealot because I'm usually running the Bolt Gun or Flamer, which has Flak and Unyielding for my range weapon. So it's just like to balance out in terms of my ability to deal with different types of enemies. And the blessings are a little bit different. I ran Agile and Uncanny on my Veteran, but for my Zealot, I run Shred instead. And the reason for this is to basically build up my quick chance stacks, which I'll talk about in the talents later. Now, as for the choice of weapons, it's either between the Bolt Gun and the Flamer. I'm personally a bigger fan of the Bolt Gun because, especially for teams that are lacking in boss damage, the Bolt Gun allows you to chip down your bosses faster. And in Havoc 2.0, given the boss rush or the boss spam that they're throwing at you, you want to be able to deal with the bosses as quickly and efficiently as possible. Otherwise, they're just going to keep running and your team's going to get overrun, and that's not what you want to be happening, right? So Shattering Impact and Puncture, some people run, I can't remember, I think it was Cavalcade instead. But yeah, this is generally the build for it. As for Kyros, same thing as Veteran, 2 Toughness and 1 Stamina. Of course, running Combat Ability Regeneration, Stam Regeneration, the standard perks on your Blessings or Kyros. Now as for your talents, right, so 2 points straight down the middle for additional boss damage. Works on the Flamer as well. You can deviate from this if you want to. I'm personally a fan of the throwing knives, and unfortunately you don't see many people using the left blitz because the left nodes on the top of the Zealot tree are pretty fucking bad for what they do. So anyway, the Zealot tree offers a lot less, and considering a lot less flexibility compared to the Veteran build, and considering the Veteran build isn't that flexible already, it's kind of telling in terms of which talent trees do need a rework and a balancing on their side. So there are definitely some nodes in the game that are inferior to the rest, and I'll leave it to the more experienced theory crafters to explain why they are the way they are. Anyway, in any case, I'm personally a fan of the throwing knives. So your standard top part of the tree looks something like this. You want this for your toughness sustain. Melee blitz is always nice to have. And the throwing knives, right? This by far is my favorite part of the Zealot, and it's actually why I enjoy playing the Zealot so much. Because if for whatever reason your team is falling short in terms of your range capabilities and dealing with things like your gunners, mutant specialists, right? The Zealot actually can fill this role and make up for your teammates' shortcomings by with well placed blades. You basically land headshots. You can one shot your flak armored drag gunners, your scab gunners, your specials, your maniacs, all those kind of things, right? And it's actually very useful and very nice to have because this is going to be coming back almost all the time as long as you're getting your melee kills. And for this reason is also why I'm not a fan of running the combat blade, despite the fact that, it's a very high mobility weapon that allows the Zealot to zip in and out of combat engagements, because I want my things to actually kill and do damage. Because for me, the best status effect is not bleeding, it's not stagger, it's death. If they're not there, they can't hurt you. So that's what I'm going for. Right, and so we move straight down to the left path of the tree. Duelist is basically number one for damage DPS. And the safety net for the Zealot comes from your Until Death and Holy Revenant. These two, I think, no question as to why they're the best. And because every 2 minutes you basically get one free life. And this is something that allows you to not die, keep your team alive, and keep yourself alive as well. Right, and Benediction. In some rare cases, especially when you're running blight spreads, you may have to redivert your points to running the middle aura instead, especially for blight spreads, or if you are unlucky enough to be forced to play with the Poxgas modifier. So you can probably like reshuffle some points to go down the middle path instead. But for the most part, yeah, this rarely happens, and because most people would choose not to play Poxgas, and for blight spreads, you can kind of get away with it by proper positioning and making sure that targets are eliminated at range. So yeah, but for now this will be the general build that we run. And then for chorus, basically the modifiers straightforward. Some people do run this. Some people choose not to run it at all because they maybe like channel 2 or 3 pulses, make sure everyone stop up and they move away for it, and they can do whatever with that one additional flex point. I personally like to run this because I like to keep my team as safe as long as possible and make sure that my uptime on my chorus is as high as I can. And in terms of variation on builds, there really isn't much else to the bottom of the tree. This is basically the strongest in your best in slot in terms of the points you can invest in, and Blazing Piety is there to boost your crit chance. And why? And these two notes are basically the reason why we run Shred, is because we want to maximize your Invocation of Death to provide as much uptime on your chorus as possible. So, is it a fun build? Is it a fun build? No, maybe not necessarily. It's definitely not as fun and risk rewarding as something like the Charge Zealot instead. But if, once again, I emphasize, you're looking to win games safely and consistently, you want to go for this build with Chorus. Right? So basically, Invocation of Death allows you to keep this uptime high as long as you're meleeing things with your light attack spams, which is basically where your Shred Blessing comes into play. Chain hit, bonus critical chance, you stack 20% of it, and basically you're going to be getting this talent proccing every few seconds. Like every 4 seconds is going to be uptime, and effectively, if you read this correctly, it says plus 200%. That means to say that it's essentially a 3 times cooldown on your ability. So if you play your cards right, with all your base cooldown stacking, your average cooldown with the right auras and your curio bonuses will be like something like 48 seconds. And if you keep hitting this alongside with all your other teammates, like your veterans, Psyker and your Ogryn buffs, you're going to be getting this on a very low cooldown. So for those junkies that run the combat blade, which is a innately high crit chance, they're going to be like getting a chorus like every 10 seconds. I think that's a bit overkill. You don't need it that often. Something on the order of like 20 seconds, if you're playing really, really safe, is more than good enough. And do you want to use this off cooldown? Well, it kind of depends. That boils down to execution, but golden toughness is always good to have, and it's always nice to have your team staying alive as long as they can. So, and yeah, so basically Zealot build, not too much in terms of variety. I don't think there's much else in terms of how to play it. Right, so for variations on the weapons, we talk about the Flamer instead. I think some people run the one that gives your Everlasting Flame, which moves your ammo from your magazine to your from your reserve to your life magazine. I don't really think that's necessary if you balance out your reloads and time it right. You want obviously dump stats mobility and flank unyielding, same as the bolt gun, right? Yeah. So and since we are on this topic, we talk about here brittleness. Brittleness is one of the things in the game, especially for bosses and your flag and carapace enemies, that actually makes your life of your other two classes a lot easier. And you notice that brittleness is, I think someone has posted a video before on like why brittleness. I don't remember which content creator it was, but you want this because you want brittleness over rending, because brittleness applies to the rest of your team. Rending only benefits yourself. And in a team-oriented game like Havoc, a team-oriented difficulty modifier, you want to be picking things that benefit your whole team and not just yourself. It's a team game, not a selfish game, right? So that's the reason why we go for penetrating flame instead. Right, same goes for your bolt gun. Alright, so yeah, combat blade choices. Honestly, I think again variation on this. Some people dump mobility, some people dump your first target. I'm sorry, not first target, damage instead. Some people dump yeah. So I've tried all three a little bit. Honestly, end of the day, I think most of your damage comes from bleeds, and that's the reason why people drop damage unintuitively. Right, so yeah, that will be the alternate weapons that you can choose instead. Right, so moving on to the one class that I find to be the most essential in the game. Alright, let's talk about the Psyker. Now, I've played many games of Havoc. How many you ask? Ever since launch in December 2024, that was the first week of last year during the holiday season, I've pretty much not skipped a single week of Havoc 40. I've cleared on every week, I've done every reset, I've grinded within the week from 30 to 40 for the last 2 season resets in the last month and 3 months before that. And each time I've played, I've also done some stupid variations like 4 Psykers, 4 Veterans, 4 Ogryns, 4 Zealots, 4 Arbites. I've done, you name it, I've done pretty much all of them. I have not used non-meta builds because once again, I'm not a fan of it. And one class that I find that is pretty much indisposable is the Psyker. So let's get straight into it. The Psyker build, again, the Dueling Sword originally was the Psyker exclusive, and for this reason, I don't think there's any debate as to why any other weapon he should be using. The Psyker is one class that basically benefits from almost no talents giving a bonus melee damage. Some people choose to run the combat blade instead for mobility. Again, that's not my playstyle. I prefer to be able to kill things rather than run from them as much as I can. So when it comes to the perks and the blessings, once again, I'm dealing with unyielding and carapace on my melee for the most part, because those are the targets I struggle with the most when it comes to my ranged weapons. Dump stat for me will be cleave again. So, and uncanny, and this time around I have the benefit of taking a blessing other than agile or shred. I will take trust instead, and this allows me to boost my damage to secure kills on things like your mutants and your flag armored enemies when you're at close range with them, right? So, and that's the reason why I take uncanny and trust. As for the ranged weapons, why the Psyker is so indisposable is because of the fact that he's the only class in the game that can take a ranged weapon that does not consume ammo. He is a high sustain, very fragile build, but he allows for the rest of the team to benefit without consuming a lot of resources, and also while also dishing out tons of damage. And in a massive clusterfuck horde event like Havoc, where they're throwing out 30 armored units at you at the same time, they are purple and orange and they're healing each other. You want to have basically the infinite cleave effect from things like your flamer and your, you want your crowd control AoE effects. Most people who play the game starting out as a Psyker going into like your standard difficulty loop from Sedition, Sedition's not here anymore, but Uprising, Malice, Heresy, Damnation, and now Auric. I was never a fan of the Infernal Force stuff to begin with because of its slow time to kill on a single target weapon. Most people would default to things like the electrokinetic stuff or the Void Strike instead. But when it comes to Havoc, the issue being that the hordes you're dealing with are so thick and tanky, there is pretty much only 1 or 2 weapons that comes out head and shoulders again on top of any other weapon, and that will be your Infernal Force stuff and secondarily your Trauma, right? And these 2 weapons use 2 pretty much distinct builds over the other. Right, so before we get into the builds, we talk about the heroes. The Psykers has a little bit of flexibility here. Some people run more stamina than they do toughness. Some people choose to run health. Some people in unique scenarios also run with like one wound. I don't know why, because like one wound generally doesn't really provide for much survivability unless you're not very confident in your ability to not blow up using a Psyker, right? But for the most part, again, your toughness, your stamina is pretty much the bread and butter for your heroes, right? Again, combat ability regeneration, stamina, so on and so forth. For the Psyker, because of how fast he gets back his stamina inherently, he has a higher base stamina regeneration compared to the other classes. You can afford to ditch that and take other things like your toughness regeneration for more bonuses, right? So there's a little bit more wiggle room in terms of the perks that you can use for the Psyker. Right, so moving on to the talents, right? Let's discuss this section by section. And with regards to the Psykers I've seen and played with, right, there are definitive scenarios where you can tell you're playing with a weak Psyker versus a strong one. And how do you know? Basically, once again, the scoreboard, you can tell that the Psyker is not dishing out as much damage as possible. Or when you're playing against a purple modifier, things are not dying fast enough. And it's very telling when you're playing like a veteran and a zealot with a dueling sword and you have no crowd control capabilities. Or you have to spend more time focusing on clearing out crowds because your Psyker tends to struggle. Right, so don't get me wrong, it's not to say that the Psyker alone has to be the one doing all the crowd control, because when you're up against, on Havoc 40, 30 crushers coming at you with a mix of purple bulwarks within them, it's impossible for the Psyker on his own to clear them all out within a short span of time. He needs additional team support, whether it's from the Zealot Flamer, the veterans Shredder Frag Grenades, from the Ogryn's Taunt or Rumbler attacks to basically thin out the hordes and whittle down the purples faster so that you can actually get to working on the non-purples, right? So, but generally, by and large, I do not recommend any Psyker to take the Battle Meditation perk, because this prevents you from maintaining a high enough peril that prevents you from, benefiting from your Ward Rider, which is a substantial damage bonus increase with a higher peril that you have. So you want to be hovering at around generally 70 to 80% in engagements when you're playing as a Psyker. But when you do quell, you can quell to full, you can charge it back out again, but you don't want to have a case where you're damaging a horde and it's bringing you to consistently lower than 40 to 30%, because then you're not going to be getting any damage bonuses from your Ward Rider at all. And it hurts. It's very visible when you play with a Psyker that's doing low damage versus one that's doing high damage, right? Now for the left node, Brain Burst is the one of choice for Kinetic Flare. The reason being that it provides you additional burst damage on your elites and specials, things like your crushers. It allows you to have like higher single target damage, and it comes off very quickly when you have your Infernal stuff. Right, some people choose to run the Kinetic Resonance with the bubble instead. I'll get to that later. But some people tend to avoid Kinetic Flare because of the fear of popping bursters accidentally. Well, there's an easy fix for that. Just don't flame in the direction of bursters as much as you can, or ensure that you're chaining your left click attacks with your right click attacks when using your Burger Staff alternate fire, right, to make sure that you push them at the same time, right? So yeah, for me personally, this is my build of choice. I would say that this is not something that is good to have. You don't need it, but it's nice to have, right? So, but definitely not as it's not. I don't feel so strongly about this as I do Battle Meditation. Now, for the rest of the points, I go to Wildfire and Soul Blaze. So this is particularly valuable when it comes to your purple enemies, because how Soul Blaze works, to the best of my understanding, is that the number of stacks is actually, the damage actually scales exponentially with the number of stacks that comes onto Soul Blaze. Right, that means to say that if you have 16 stacks of Soul Blaze versus 31, even though the stacks is about twice as much as 16, you're actually doing like maybe 2.5 times to 3 times more damage compared to 16 stacks. It's not it's not a linear scaling, so you want to be having as much stacks as possible. And when you get a chain effect on purple enemies, it's actually very satisfying, very rewarding when you go from like wiping out 20 or 25 crushers once you flame them long enough. But again, once again, I emphasize you do need support from the rest of the team to pull this off, right? Psykinetics Aura, undoubtedly on any high intensity shock trooper modifier, including Havoc. It's the most valuable one that you want to have to make sure your ability cooldown is high enough. Right, you definitely want that. I don't see a reason why people would give up this node, because it doesn't make any sense. And then CS Presence, this is base cooldown reduction. You don't really need this when you have this, because having ability cooldowns basically means to say that you benefit from your other teammates' ability buffs as well. your Veteran Shout, your Ogryn Taunt, your Veterans, Zealot's Chorus, so on and so forth. Arbites also has his Nuncio charge, right? So, and 10% cooldown. I've seen some people say they choose to take this, or maybe in some curse builds they choose to take Prescience instead. Don't forget that this is a base cooldown reduction. That means to say that your bubble, for example 40 seconds, you're shaving off an entire 4 seconds off of this. For your Veteran, 30 seconds, it goes from 30 to 27. Chorus is 6 seconds, and having your 10% cooldown off an entire match that lasts an average of 30-35 minutes allows you to use your ability 10% more times. That is like, having maybe going from like 80% to 90% uptime, which is humongous benefit. So I don't see a reason why you would ditch this aura unless you already have another Psyker on the team. Right. So Empathic Evasion, number 1 value for crit hits and dodging range hits, is the one thing that keeps the Psyker alive when your bubble is off cooldown. Right, and I ditched one with the Warp because you don't really need this given how squishy the Psyker already is. Right, for the most part, the Psyker is a glass cannon. You have to play it well, and most of the Psyker people that I know, they ditch like all their defensive capabilities for offensive capabilities. The more confident you get and the more experience you are in Havoc, the better this will become. So once you're able to dodge your Postwalkers and not get hit in the back or get ambushed by them, you should be not relying on this anymore, right? So as for Bubble, as usual, the full dome. Warp Rider, we've already explained this. Kinetic Deflection, always nice to have in the event that you're dealing with bosses. And going straight down the tree on the left hand side, right? We don't choose Rending because 10% Rending really doesn't really offer much in terms of damage. Most of your damage is going to come from your Soul Blaze stacks anyway, which is not affected by Rending as far as I understand. Emperor Resolve is better to keep up your peril, to make sure that you are able to flame longer and keep your sustain in the middle of a fight. And while also, not relying on things like Battle Meditation to ensure that your Warp Rider stacks and damage is high. And as for Warp Siphon, this is the one thing that again allows you to keep up uptime on your bubble. We don't run Peril Generation Reduction because this is a trap. For the same reason we don't run Battle Meditation, it actually keeps your damage lower, so we don't run this. And instead we run Infire Reborn with Purgatus. Your Infernal Force stuff along with 6 warp charges, and this will basically be up. You are going to be having 6 warp charges almost all the time as long as you're running this, right? So that will be the general Psyker build. I do think I have an alternate trauma build. I have not run this in a while though. This what resistance is the dump stat again? Oh, sorry, I forgot to show the stats on the Inferno. So basically, Blaze Away, and again, Britannia's Penetrating, I think is good value for the rest of the team. Perks will be Flag and Crit Chance. As for Trauma, Rending Shockwave and Warp Flurry. And for the talents wise, I think... Now, this time around for Trauma, you are more less damage oriented, but you're more on crowd control. I think this is a meme. I don't know why I was running Crystalline Will, but this is a kind of a dated build that I haven't played in a while. But the Trauma build is particularly relevant for when you don't have the raid crowd control immunity modifier on Havoc. This allows you to keep up your teammates' ability to survive by basically knocking them down all to the ground. And I think the reason why you're running your Peril Generation Reduction now, as opposed to your Purgatus build, is because you're not doing so much damage, you're basically doing more CC abilities, right? So this is nice to have when your team is taking a more slow and cautious approach, and you want to have like basically knock down staggers on things like tanky armor hordes versus killing them, and then your teammates will slowly pick them off with enough damage over time. Right, so but for the most part, not too much variation in terms of the build. Right, so yeah, I don't know why I was missing that. That was definitely not something that's supposed to be there. Right, and yeah, so Trauma, alternative weapon, but for the most part, I think 80% of the Psykers you see out there will be running the Purgatus. Right, so Trauma is just something to explore. It can work, it's not a bad weapon, and because it still has a sufficiently good AoE clear. Right, but yeah, so essentially that's generally the Psykers that you want to be playing when you're playing as the lone Psyker in a Havoc 40 build. So moving on to the fourth and probably the last class I'm going to be talking about for this video, because Arbites is kind of a little bit broken right now. Bought my Ogryn. The ability of choice I would choose for the Ogryn is pretty much the Taunt Ogryn, because of the his ability to basically attract aggro to himself and to also provide a damage buff on all the enemies. a flat 25% damage bonus. I'm not sure whether it's additive or multiplicative. And weapon of choice, again, I'm not a very creative person. I don't really believe in other weapons, but I do think ever since the Ogryn 2.0 rework, he's in a very strong place right now. I personally am a fan of the MK3B Bully Club because I'm not a very melee-oriented person, and I like just having... I have an all-green brain when it comes to melee weapons. I just like to left-click, and I don't want to think too much about chaining melee combos and like doing advanced things that forces me to manage my stamina and do other fancy like things with it, because I just want to hit things and I want to watch them die instantly. Alright. So for Bully Club, NK3B. Again, Brittonus on the Blessings Thunderous and Skull Crusher, which is nice to have. And this build in particular allows you to basically trivialize the twins in Havoc when they do show up. So the Ogryn's role in Havoc has been relegated to sort of like a taunt and like a boss handling mechanic. He applies Brittonus so fast and so quickly to bosses, and he attracts their attention that the rest of the team can just basically burst down bosses as fast as they can. Right? Weapon of choice, so many available to the Ogryn. Some people run the GG, some people run the Heavy Stubber, some people run the Ripper Gun or the Rumbler. Most of these weapons, other than the Kickback and the Twinkling Heavy Stubber, work pretty well. But yeah, honestly, it's really kind of up to you what range weapon you'll be doing, because if anything, the Ogryn is the one class that can probably get away in the whole match with nothing but his melee weapon. Alright, so it really doesn't really matter. It's really up to you what you want to do here. Alright. Keywords of choice, because you have so much stamina, you can run like 2 toughness, 1 health. Some people health max, some people toughness max, really up to you, it doesn't really matter. But the perks are almost always standard. I like to run a revive speed on the Ogryn because usually having the most health in game, you're the most suited to pull off your clutch revives, right? So it's always nice to have that additional bonuses. Now when it comes to the talents, I am not a fan of the class. I copied this build from somebody else, but you want your builds focused on the bottom part, and from what I gather, it's again kind of flexible. But to walk through it very quickly, you want your toughest regeneration on the top. You don't want to waste points on useless nodes like this or this. This is not a very good node. That's the reason why we're doing on left. I don't need steady grip because I'll be getting most of my toughness from the rest of my teammates, or like just basically meleeing things. Rarely should you be putting yourself in a position where you need to rely on this to get your toughness back, unless you're the only one left in the team, which is a situation that you don't want to be getting to in the first place. Right. Now for the grenade choice, as you can see, this is why like the rest of the classes need reworking, because the Ogryn is literally the only class that has the flexibility to choose whichever grenade he wants. Some people like to run the rock for mutants. I do agree, because when running the Bully Club on the Ogryn, you are actually pretty weak against dealing with your mutants and hounds. But I personally prefer the frag bomb for very kind of like what do you call it? Aggravating or very risky situations when you're getting swarmed, and the frag bomb does a decent job of clearing out the hordes as soon as it can. Or alternatively, it can also, if well placed enough, it can one shot or clear out a massive amount of ritualists if you're playing on the Hexbound Demon Host modifier. Right, so this is definitely nice to have. And paired with the veteran field improvisation, allows you to basically get your grenades back from emerald crates when you manage them throughout the run. Alright. Middle pathway, resistances and various, really up to you which one you want to take again. So there's some flexibility here, but don't spend too much points in this area. Now as for the Taunt Ogryn, so basically why I choose this over the other two abilities. Point Blank Barrage is basically a ammo hog. Rarely do I see Ogryns playing this, because in most times when they do run the Point Blank Barrage, given the high base cooldown on the ability, it's rare to see this actually doing the work that it needs to do when you can do it with bosses in a much more safer and more consistently and more efficient way. So, and this usually tends to builds that rely on the right path tend to throw up a lot more ammo, which renders your classes that are better suited to dealing range targets like your veteran, shorter on resources. So I generally don't recommend a point blank barrage build. Taunt and Charge both can work fairly well. You don't want to be spending more than 3 points on the abilities, but essentially, Valuable Distraction is the one that gives you more base multiplicative damage on top of everything else, and this is a huge, massive buff to have for your Loyal Protector build, right? So, okay, so again, up to you which one you want to choose, but as long as you're making sure to use your abilities, your team should be fine. Right, so left path for melee aura. This is generally a better aura compared to stay close. This is kind of weak, I think, and you won't be going down the right path, right? So right, better ever since the Ogryn rework basically allows you to bleed out everything, even with light attacks now, which makes Ogryn a very strong contender in terms of overall damage. So he's in a very good spot right now. Make sure to abuse that to as much of your advantage as possible in a meta build. Right, so we go down to the middle tree, and don't forget your standard cooldown regeneration that benefits not just you but your entire team as well. And then we go on the left middle for your melee attacks more damage, at the same time taking your things like no pushover, which allows you to sometimes like stagger bulwarks if you need to also. Right, and then for the keystone, you want heavy hitter, and this is where like there's some debate as to whether you choose cleave or impact. So impact is, well, I understand that it doesn't do any damage. It allows you to basically knock things down and keep things like your twins, like Rodin and Rinda, basically knocked down, and they don't get out from the floor once their shield is down. It's actually kind of hilarious when you do play a build like this. And Ogryn with this build basically allows you to trivialize twins once the shield is down, and you can basically just keep them on the ground, they don't get out, and they're in one phase, you can get rid of the shield and the entire health pool along with it. Because the twins, unlike the captains, they don't regenerate their shields. Okay, based on their health gates, they just stick their shields are on a timer rather than health gate. I think the time is like maybe about 10 to 15 seconds. So within that 10 seconds, if you can remove and deplete the entire health bar, they're dead. They're taken out from the game. And usually most people will do this on the melee twin. They'll kite a little bit backwards into a more defensible location and just basically burst him down. Right, so that's where you want to be using your impactful, right, over your cleave damage instead, right? And basically for the Ogryn, that's it. Not too much to talk about, right? So the last class, or the newly introduced Arbites, which won't be applicable for those who did not purchase him. He's in a little bit of a weird spot right now, because while he is individually pretty busted in the sense that he has very strong damage nodes, he's capable of dishing a lot of damage, there are a few problems. The first being the fact that he's still new and that there's quite a number of things that are buggy about him. So in the last week, Fat Shark actually released a patch that lasted for about 2 days, in which the bleed from the dog was absolutely fucking broken. It was dealing 4 to 5 times more damage. Stacks weren't applying like twice as much as they should have, so he was just basically bleeding bosses to death all on his own and dealing like 2 or 3 times boss damage all on his own compared to the second highest player in the team. So, and they patched that last Wednesday, which is I think the first week of July. And now the left hand side of the keystones, a lot of them, they don't work properly. So I don't want to talk too much about the Arbites when he's in kind of like a broken state right now, whether some of the things are not working properly or not. But by and large, the Arbites is a more individualistic class. As you can see, compared to the other 3 classes, the Veteran, Psyker, and Ogryn, he lacks team abilities that keep your teammates from getting your cooldown reduction back. The Zealot has a very strong individual cooldown reduction. The Arbites, I don't think there is any in his tree, but for the most part, you can go down any part of the tree, focusing most of your points on the bottom, and you can get it to work because of how much damage he's dishing out. And he's getting his his toughness from coherency from his own dog as well, if you're not running Lone Wolf. So there's so many different ways to play him in a way that makes him work. You can run castigated stance to keep you like have perpetual uptime and survivability also. Right, so many different things you can do. And yeah, the dog is basically nice if you know how to manage your pings and like do your specialist eliminations. Right, so the ironic thing is that one thing that we've come out of playing with like your Arbites builds is that usually in a standard team composition where you have 1 Veteran, 1 Chorus Zealot, 1 Bubble Psyker, and 1 Taunt Ogryn, usually the Arbites replaces, or at least in my personal preference, the Zealot, because the Zealot is the guy that provides the safety net, and as explained before, because your Veterans providing so much golden toughness from a high shout cooldown, high shout uptime, you don't really need the additional defensiveness from your Chorus Zealot. You can substitute it for more offensive killing power on your Arbites, right? So again, take this with a pinch of salt, because different teams with different varying degrees of experiences may choose to take the more cautious route. If you're dealing with a weaker team that has a tendency to, take things slower, or maybe you're a bit weak on damage, I would definitely recommend playing a Chorus Zealot over a more offensive Arbites. If you're playing with a more seasoned team and you want the match to go by faster, you can definitely play the Arbites instead. Alright, so generally speaking, again, because of how messy he is right now, I don't want to talk too much about it. Right, so, and oh yes, sorry, before I forget, a quick 30 seconds on the Veterans alternate build, right? One of the builds that is particularly popular in the Chinese public games for Havoc 40 is people run the Smoke Grenade. It's gone so far as where I've heard stories of, like, people getting kicked from Havoc games because their veteran was not running a Smoke Grenade build. So to show you an alternate for Smoke Grenades, basically it looks something like, I think it was this one. Alright, so instead of the left path, which looks like this, you want to be running the right path. And because of how essential Survivalist is, I'm basically giving up 3 points on the filler to essentially take the Smoke Grenades. Right? So going from this to this, you're basically using up maybe what? 2, 3, you have to use up 2 more points for the Tinkerer. And I lose like several points in that regard. And when you run a smoke build, this is probably more preferred for modifiers like Pass Harden, where your range damage is game, and the Veteran will default to a more range playstyle, which is where you take your nodes like Desperado or maybe Reciprocity over Close Quarter Skill Zone, personal preference, right? Okay, but this is one of the builds that you can play with. And the Smoke Grenade build, again, not my personal preference, but it allows you to run past enemies and make everything essentially stupid. You turn the specials actually special, like they can't notice you, you can run past them, you can ignore them, your whole team can just move past, and the gunners and everything will not be a threat. The only things that are a threat are your disablers, your flamers, your crushers, your melee units, gunners, shotgunners, reapers. All those things are no longer going to be harassing you anymore if you have your perpetual uptime on your smoke grenades, right? So, and the only thing I can say is that if you're running smoke grenades with shout and your teammates are still getting down to gunners and stuff, you're probably playing your smokes wrong. You're not placing them where you need to be. You're not using them as much as you have to, right? So just keep that uptime. All right. So right. So that will be my hour-long rant on Havoc, and to close off, maybe we'll talk about the future. What I'm probably going to be doing next week onwards is I'll just post old footage of my Havoc 40 gameplay from like previous records. Things that maybe I find interesting or relevant to keep up with the current meta. Maybe when they do a revamp to the plasma gun and the dueling sword, or maybe skill trees on the veteran zealot Psyker, maybe even. Right, and I'll come back to it then, or until there's new changes to Havoc or new interesting end game content that actually forces you to think and do things differently in Darktide, I will probably be devoting my resources to playing other games. So with that said, in closing statements, again, if you are struggling to win in your Havoc games, 3 things: builds, team play, execution. If you're doing the latter 2 right, it's probably the builds. And please, for the love of God, don't be insane. Don't just keep taking the same thing, trying to do the same thing when it's not proving its results. Get your mods in, download mods like Scoreboard, things like oven-proof modifiers allows you to view more details and make a quantitative assessment. The Scoreboard isn't for you to shit on your other teammates, it's for you to improve game on game. It's a personal self-improvement tool. And you can have other quality of life mods like your inspect from social to see whether or not your teammates are running builds that are kind of like optimized or relevant. Things like numeric UI that helps you to get a better sensing of your teammate ability cooldowns in game, your teammate quantities of ammo in more detail, so on and so forth. Boss health bars, because for whatever reason Fat Chart has not optimized the health bars in game. They don't show you more than 2 health bars. For Havoc mode, when there can be more than 3 or 4 bosses on you at the same time, which I think is kind of silly. So basically, download whatever quality of life mods you want. This isn't a PvP game, it's a PvE game, right? Anything that allows you to enhance your experience. Right, and don't skimp on this. If you're a console player, I'm sorry, too bad that's not available to you. But the gist of the game is that winning Havoc 40 consistently on the order of a 70 to 80% win rate is really not difficult if you put your heart and your mind to it. And when it boils down to it, it's a team game. So please do your best, be a team player, and you'll realize that the end experience is a lot easier or a lot less stressful than it has to be, especially when you have limited time on your hands, right? So, and again, your mileage may vary. Take all this advice with a pinch of salt. This is my personal opinion, but if you're looking to win, don't be stubborn and don't refuse to play the meta. Results do matter in a game difficulty like Havoc. Alright, so and that will be it from me. Thanks for listening to my yapping, and this will be Insom signing off.